Welcome, everybody. This is Doris Malkmus. I'm inviting you to join us for Preserving Our History. It's an interactive workshop where we're going to be letting you know about all of the resources we created on the archivist and archiving toolkit. I'm Doris Malkmus. I've been an archivist with LGBTQ-RAN since 2003. I'm very happy to have rejoined RAN after I retired in 2015. And as this is my final year, I'm happy, so delighted to turn the reins over to Taylor McNeilly. They are someone with 10 years of experience in an archive. And they hold an MA in history, an MLS from Simmons University, as well as a digital archive specialist certification from the Society of American Archivists, and a certification in records and information management from ARMA International. They live and work in Rhode Island with their dog, Jessie, and they have a multilingual personal library of over 1,100 volumes. Before we begin the workshop, I'd like to introduce a short video from our executive director, Mark Bowman.
Welcome, friends. LGBTQ-RAN is a unique venture dedicated to preserving the history of LGBTQ religious movements around the world. LGBTQ-RAN is a digital enterprise. We are not a physical repository that stores papers. We advise and support leaders and groups in their efforts to preserve their records in appropriate archives. Furthermore, we collect and provide a treasure of historical information on our website about LGBTQ+ persons and groups from a wide array of religious expressions around the world. And finally, we encourage research and scholarship on queer religious history.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for your interest in coming to this archive and also for your interest and devotion to preserving LGBTQ religious history. I'm glad to be here with our new archivist, Taylor, and I'd like to thank all of you who indicated your particular situation and need for information about archiving. That helped us quite a bit in shaping how we're going to operate this workshop. So we created the toolkit a year ago. I want to give a hand and a shout out to Isaiah, who did all of the graphic interface work, because what we realized is that when we created one long text document that tells people how to think about archiving, is that a lot of people just more or less didn't start reading it. And so we thought we'd like to make it more accessible, and we'd like to make it so that if you come to our website and you have a particular question about how to archive, you'd be able to get to it quickly. And so what I'd like to do is show you how to get to it quickly. This is our website. Under Preserving History on our main webpage, you'll just go down to Donate Your Records and click on the big archive, big icon of Archiving Toolkit. This is the way that we shaped our information that will help people to know how to find information about archiving. And the way we broke it down into individual things is to let you know about boxed records, digital records, social media. And then we had a lot of information that applies to everything and is a good idea about some just really good general information. So when Taylor and I thought about how we would do this workshop today, what we decided is we would ask participants to let us know what they're interested in. And from those replies, we created kind of a conglomerate scenario, a typical scenario that we think will let us talk to you about all of the ways you can use the organization within the toolkit to find the information that you want. So to do this, Taylor has agreed to be a person in need of help with an archive. Taylor, I'd like to introduce you and welcome you as somebody who's just inherited a collection from a dear friend.
Yes. So, hi, everybody. For this moment, I'm taking off the archivist hat and putting on this scenario. So, Doris, I have a friend who has been a lifelong LGBTQ activist, has been very active, but was recently diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And because of this, I've sort of become responsible for, just this mountain of personal papers that we'd really like to get, documented and preserved somewhere. But I don't really even know how do I start with this? What do I do?
That is such a typical question. It very seldom rises to the surface because no one sits down at their computer and says, help, I don't know where to start. But that's exactly why we're here. And I think the best place, if I were starting something brand new, I'd kind of want to know, what do archives save? And so what I would suggest to someone is go to what to save. What does that look like? And you can see when you click on that you're going to get information about what kind of documents should be donated to a historical repository. And on the left side, it says rules of thumb. Do not discard anything. And another one is do not rearrange files as you review them. I'd also like to introduce one of the resources on our site, which is these short, zippy little videos. So I'm going to play one just so you get a feel for what they're like.
Question organizations have when contemplating donating their records is, what documents are considered historical? The following records are considered historical: Constitution and bylaws, board meeting packets, minutes, and committee files, annual reports including financial reports and annual meeting programs, correspondences, your newsletters, event and conference records such as publicity, speakers, topics, etc., scrapbooks, flyers, banners, brochures, and handouts, newspaper clippings, memorabilia like buttons, t-shirts, and costumes, photographs, audio cassettes, CDs, DVDs, and other audiovisual formats. The following is a list of items that are not considered historical. The archives will discard these items: books that are easily obtainable, duplicates, the archives will save only 2 or 3 copies, personnel records, bank statements, receipts, and cash books, travel and event arrangements. Once you donate your materials, the archives will review and sort your organization's historical records. Thank you for watching. Need more help? You can find our contact information and resources below.
So you can see that there's a lot more information in the toolkit than we can go over at this time. But what else would you like to know?
Well, Doris, thank you so much for that. That was very helpful. But you say the rule of thumb is don't discard anything and don't rearrange files. How do I know if there's maybe sensitive materials in these papers? They're not mine, they're my friends. And if I'm not going through them, what if there's things there that maybe my friend wouldn't want publicly available? What do I do about that?
Well, the archives are going to share your concern about privacy. And in fact, when you donate things to an archive, they don't just put it in folders and put it in the public. They sort through them, they read things, and they're also concerned never to release things like, social security numbers and things like that. But you might think to yourself, maybe in their letters from people who address them as a member of an organization, maybe there's some people there who wouldn't want their information known. So every time an archives receives a donation, they like to kind of talk over with the donor what would be sensitive information, what should we flag. And then in a gift agreement, the archivist will work with you to flag things that they know might be of concern to you. Before the collection goes out to the public, they will give you or have a discussion with you about all of those items. A gift agreement will spell out all of those concerns, and it'll even spell out, like, if the archive does not want, say, a collection of books or a collection of newsletters on some other topic that are readily available someplace else, what would they do with the discarded items? So I think the next step in your process is going to be working things out on kind of a one-to-one basis with the archivist. But before you can do that, you need to be able to talk to an archivist, and preferably an archivist that you're interested in. Before you can make that call, you need to be able to have some information at your fingertips. And that information is, how big is this collection? What is it about? And who was this person? Why would my archive be interested in their papers? And so while you'll know quite a bit about your friend, you're going to have to identify how many boxes you have and a general sense of what's in them. The toolkit has a good, I'm going to navigate back to, if I can think how to do it. There we go. There we go. To helping you make an inventory of what's in a box. We're talking about paper records here, and I'm sure that if you have, say, a hard drive, or if you have other information on the person's computer, that will again be discussed with the archives, and Taylor will go into that. When you know what you have and how many boxes you have, the next thing you want to do is find an archive. Now, you can see from this map, there are far more archives in the United States than are archives interested in your particular boxes in history. So I wrote down, and we can provide the pros and cons of the 4 different kinds of archives: local, university, LGBTQ archives, or denominational archives. And so at that point, it's really helpful to, once you know kind of in general where you would be most comfortable, to talk to Taylor, who will become the new LGBTQ-RAN archivist. And I think that they will be able to help you really fine-tune what would be best for you. And then you can have conversations with them. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to an entirely different scenario so we can talk about digital records. And Taylor has given me a couple of scenarios that I think you'll find very helpful for those of you, and I would say most of you, who are wondering now what to do with their digital records. So in this scenario, I'm going to be playing the role of a person whose church has an active archive that is preserving its older physical records. But now that these records are being created digitally, the person needs to know how to preserve the new records. What can they do to continue preserving their history?
So, yeah, this is something that I hear about a lot, just in archives generally, and I'm sure, based on the survey responses we got, that this applies to at least some of y'all as well. And this is something that's very common, so don't feel like you're, totally brand new, all on your own on this. It's something that we can help you with. So to start with, I'm going to share my screen. There we go. So you can all see that. This is the page on the archiving toolkit for digital records. This has some really great information. We're not going to go too deep into all of that. But just knowing like this is a good resource that sort of goes by through some step-by-step instructions on how to preserve digital files that are on your computers, right? So it's important to note that often your institutions may be using something like Google Drive that can change the way that digital preservation works. And if you have questions about that, you're always welcome to email me as the new LGBTQ-RAN archivist, and I can help you with that. But for things that are, specifically documenting your mission, your activities, anything about your organization, that material you can sort of compile into a single folder, make sure you're backing that folder up. And when we talk about this, make sure that we're still following those rules of thumb, right? That you're not rearranging the files, you're moving those, you're maintaining that folder structure where possible. And this website is great. Doris put a lot of work into it. It covers a lot of really interesting information, right? So, like, what do you do with digital video or digital audio files? How to make sure that your folders are labeled in a way that makes sense to other people, right? All of this is super important stuff. There is some information here about how to save website files, and there are other ways to do that as well, including the Wayback Machine.
That's amazing. The thing that's intimidating for me is, what if my files are messy? I'm not asking that as a question. I'm just making an observation that I think I would hear a lot. But in addition to that, here's another scenario from someone who's involved in the work of with multiple websites, accounts, including blogs, Facebook, Instagram, and other social media. How can I ensure that my information on these sites is preserved?
So once again, right, like we got this question in. This is a really important thing that a lot of people are dealing with. And Doris was perhaps prophetic in the creation of the archiving toolkit, because we have a page that talks about these as well. So the first thing I'll actually talk about is what to do when you do have websites. So down here at the bottom, you'll see in the digital records page, we talk about how to back up websites as specific files. And if you're maintaining your own website, you can do this, right? However, the other option is to use what's called the Internet Archive. So you may have heard of the Internet Archive. It's been in the news a little bit over the past couple of years. And one of the things that the Internet Archive does is what's called a web crawl. And what this means is they will take a screenshot of a website, right? They'll document a website at a specific moment in time. You can always search to see if they're doing this already automatically, and you can reach out to them to set up regular crawls of your website. You can also use very specifically, well, let me just jump down, that's faster. The Save Page Now link on their website, if you click on that, and here on the right-hand side, you see it says Save Page Now. You just put in a website. This is one I used recently. And it will just capture a copy of that website as it exists in that moment. So if you're updating your website, if it's a blog, every time you write a new blog post, you can save the page this way. If you're updating a home page on a monthly or weekly basis, you can do these as well. And this way, it's always available through the Internet Archive in order to handle that material. Now, for social media, this is very different. Most social media pages are either limited access through browsers or not accessible through browsers, right? Like Instagram, Twitter, you have to be logged in for. Newer social media like TikTok, you have to download the app to use, right? So you can't use the Internet Archive. For that, we have a Preserving Social Media page. This goes through and talks about some of the most popular social media preservation techniques. For the most part, the best way to do this is you can actually go into your account and download a copy of everything. What's included changes based on the different platforms, right? So like Facebook includes some material that YouTube might not. Instagram might handle things differently than Facebook, right? So this page talks sort of platform by platform, exactly what to download, how to do that download, how it works. And then you basically go back to that digital records page to look at how to preserve those files once you have a copy of them. That being said, many of these things update on a regular basis. This is not always going to look the same because, as I'm sure anybody here who uses social media knows, they love to update, change where things are found, update their privacy policies. We all get the emails, right? So being aware that this is a list that is neither comprehensive nor nor static, right? We're going to be having to update this as it continues to progress. So again, if you ever have questions about any of this, right, we have YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram right now, as well as Twitter /X, if you know the new hip word for it, I guess. But if you ever have questions about these or other social media platforms you or your organization may be using, you're again always welcome to reach out and ask. And I'm happy to sort of help navigate that space for you.
I can't imagine keeping up with all of that, but I do think that it is kind of in an archivist's, wheelhouse to keep an eye on what is saved, how much is saved, and how much control we have over it. So you won't find that you're able to save all of the friends and posts that you don't make on your accounts. It's just good to know and keep an eye every once in a while to find out what exactly you can download and maintain on your own. Well, suppose you do download things and you have it on your own servers. What about a scenario that would be, suppose you've had an active, an important organization that's been creating records, and an archive comes up and says, we would like to have all of your personal papers and or your records and or all of your social media. So how would that person begin to consider what to donate? What does the process even look like when you're thinking about donating electronic and physical records?
Yeah, so this is something that, again, we get asked very often, right? When you have paper records, it can be easy to sort of look through those and see, oh, this is something I want to preserve. This is something I want to donate. Oh, this is a shopping list that's written on the back of an envelope. The archives don't need to know that I needed, bananas that week. And unfortunately, the volume of digital material tends to be significantly higher, right? It can be a much more daunting task, especially if, as Doris mentioned in that first scenario for me, right? Like it can be messy, right? Digital files aren't always well organized. It's much harder to sort of sort and file those as we go, right? Luckily, these same rules of thumb that Doris talked about on the What to Save page, these all still apply, right? We don't, as archivists, want you to be discarding anything, right? We want there to be a conversation about what is good and what is not. We want to go through that gift agreement process to talk about what it is they're going to keep and what it is they'll discard and what to do with material that they're discarding. Right? Some donors say, you know what, it's once it's out of my hands, I don't want it back. And that's perfectly fine if you don't want to get a bunch of electronic detritus back. Archivists will handle that. If, on the other hand, you say, well, no, I want to make sure that anything you don't want, I'm going to get to keep or maybe pass on to future generations, archives are always happy to do that sort of work as well. So making sure we're not discarding anything is always good, but they will, go through and find anything sensitive or duplicated, right? That's actually in some ways much easier to do with digital records. We have new tools that have been developed. Some that are specific for things like email, some that are specific for things on a hard drive, right? But they can identify algorithmically sensitive information, right? Social security numbers are structured in a certain way, and it's easier now for archives to be able to identify that information in a whole set of digital records, to identify those records and pull them out, right? And similarly, even if your digital records are a mess, archives love that. We love to know that it's a mess, right? We would prefer that you not rearrange or sort through stuff. As that digital records page said, if you want to just like copy paste into a single overarching folder, so you know exactly what's going to the archives, that's great. But the archivist will be doing a lot of this work as well. It's our job. We're trained in it. We honestly love to sort of go through and do this arrangement work. And while that does look a little bit different on our end for digital records, the process for your perspective can be very similar. If you're doing this work on your own, you want to be preserving your records. Obviously, that's that first couple of scenarios, and things look a little bit different there. But if there's an archives that's approached you about your records, it's the same sort of conversation as that physical stuff. Now, obviously, you're not going to mail them or like physically drop off boxes of digital records unless you're willing to give up your hard drive. But more often, they'll set up some form of digital delivery. And that can sound daunting, especially if you're not very tech savvy, but usually what it means is something like a Google Drive folder where you'll upload files. If it's a small enough amount of material, you can email it, but it's much easier to work with a cloud hosting service like Google Drive. They might use Dropbox or a few other services depending on what they use in the archive, but it's very simple work to do. And they really just want to get as much stuff in, and then they can take a look at it. Now, if you happen to be one of those people who is very regimented in your digital files and everything is perfectly organized and you know exactly what you have, that's great. But if you ever have questions, and of course the other concern is that inventory, I'm happy to work with folks individually to sort of help you gauge how to tell how much material you have, what that looks like, all of that sort of work. It's actually fairly easy to do, right? It does depend on if you're on a PC or a Mac, how that works. But it's easy to figure out exactly the volume of material you have, what file types those are, and how you can sort of get that to an archive. Was that helpful, Doris?
I think that I'm a little overwhelmed. In fact, I have to say, out of the scenario persona, that I forgot to say that we were racing through all of this information because we very much want this to be interactive. We kind of want you to know the sort of things you might find in the toolkit. And now what we'd like to do is to kind of have a discussion with everybody. And so I'm going to ask you to go ahead and put your questions in the chat box. So far, Ben has noted that it's difficult for the Internet Archive to crawl pages if there is something called a verification bot. Can you explain that a little bit, Taylor?
So some websites have a built-in anti-crawling feature that's really meant to prevent from like bots accessing the site too much, and against like anti-cyber attacks, right? And this is called a verification bot that requires that you verify you're a human being to access the website. This is a serious concern, right? And some websites will have this built in. If the Internet Archive is having trouble, and so when you let me explain how this works a little bit so that you get some detail, right? So you go to that save page now, you plug in the link. Internet Archive may say, hey, we caught an error, or they may say, yep, we're all done, and then give you a link to click to see the archived version of the website. Now, if you go to that and all it is a page that says, please verify you're not a bot, something's gone wrong, right? If that happens, don't worry. You can reach out to the Internet Archive and they can either, if you're the site owner, they'll work with you, or if this is another site you just want to see preserved, they can reach out to that site and find ways to work around that. There's something called API access, right? There are all these other ways that they can sort of get back-end access. There are ways to do this. It does get a little more complicated, and I don't want to get too into the weeds with it. Again, you're always welcome to reach out to me and ask if you have questions about that. I see we also had a question about international and other language websites. Yes, Internet Archive is language neutral. The way that they do this is all through just automated processes. It doesn't matter what language it is. When I was writing my history thesis for my master's in history, I was using some Japanese websites, which is one of the languages that I work in, and it collects those websites without a problem. That is not an issue at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the one other question about these that we got was Frank asked if blogs with inserted video clips, whether those clips are saved. This can vary. Typically, the answer is going to be no, unless they're also saving where those clips are stored, right? So again, if it's your website and you're hosting the video, those can be saved at the same time. That's something you can work with Internet Archive to do. But if you're embedding a video, say from YouTube, Internet Archive typically won't do that. So if that video gets taken down in the future, it may not work.
Mm-hmm. Someone, Ben, again said the Digital Transgender Archive, which is huge, of course. It's probably a good example, I think is what they mean, for privacy and security concerns.
Mm-hmm. I'm not quite sure. And quick moment to say, if folks want to either raise their hand and unmute to ask questions, we are happy to sort of have this as a verbal conversation as well as through the chat. Mm-hmm. So I'm not quite sure, Ben, what you're talking about as the Digital Transgender Archive is a good example of what. I'm not sure if that's in response to Robert's question about Google Drive. I'm going to assume that's what it was, unless I'm corrected. But Google Drive is a decent place to archive. If that's sort of like baseline, you're getting it backed up, there's some sort of digital preservation happening. It's not. Oh, Ben says no of having verification bots. All right. So speaking of Google Drive generally, then unconnected to Digital Transgender Archive. Google Drive, if all you need is back-end storage, it's not bad, right? It's limited. I have concerns about their policies around rights as to what gets uploaded into it. But it's certainly cheaper than going for something like Preserviga. That's a whole system that you need to manage, right? So it's not the worst place. It's better than nothing. It's a very sort of low bar to getting started. If you're not sure exactly what services to use, if you think you have other options, you're always welcome to reach out and we can talk through what those are. And Frank, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, just to follow up on my question. So I have a blog from 2007, and things have changed since then. So there used to be a Picasa album that had all of the full-size images, and so for things like concert programs and stuff that was small print, it was helpful to be able to go to that and see it bigger than it was on the blog page. I also have blogs with videos from travel trips, and those, the Wayback Machine just skips over them, and I don't know, I guess it's, as an old person, it's hard to trust how to preserve things that are still going to be there when I'm not there to check on them anymore.
Yeah, and this is a definite concern that folks have. The Internet Archive, when they are doing these crawls, are really just capturing that main site you pointed to, right? It doesn't always follow every single link. It's not, right, because the whole internet's connected and they never stop collecting, right? The other thing they do, though, is they do collect images, video, all of that sort of separately. So you can upload those files as separate files through their images, or if it's video, you can set it up that way. If it's a YouTube video that you can send them a link to, they can crawl that instead. All of that sort of stuff can still be done. It does take additional steps, but all of that is on their website. And if you have questions, again, I'm always happy to help sort of coordinate that with you.
So those separate files could be still linked to the original blog, or would somebody have to know how to find them?
So unfortunately, in this case, somebody would have to go looking for them in the images separate from looking at the website. That does put extra steps on the researchers who are using the space. Mm-hmm. It's not a perfect system, but hopefully any researcher who's using this material is looking through either everything as an overall search or is doing enough searching through each of these sections, right? You can't just search the Internet Archive all of their collections as opposed to just going to a website. But it kind of depends on their research habits.
So could the blog have the link to the repository included on the page, and the Wayback Machine would find that?
Yeah, if you updated your web page to say, this blog is being regularly crawled by the Internet Archive. We're also uploading photographs to the archive. If something doesn't work on the website, please check there. And then folks would see that when they go to look at it, and they'd be able to know to search. Yeah, that'd be a great workaround.
Okay. Thank you.
Of course.
Great questions, great answers. Someone else is asking, does every personal reference need to be contacted for consent before being made available? And here they say in the archive, and I'd like to maybe just distinguish, a brick and mortar archive used to be kind of a dusty place, and many things in a collection in an archive are copyrighted by someone else, but included in the donor's files. No one really thought very much about, seeking the permission of the person who sent a letter before it was put in an archive. That might be shifting somewhat as we talk about putting things on the Internet Archive. But I think I'm going to ask Taylor to give some of his thoughts about how often, how much, how do you have to contact people whose works are going to be put in your collection or on an archive, in an archive digitally.
This is, for digital records, it's always good to if you're in contact with people, if you're getting correspondence, regularly from friends, mention, hey, I'm donating my records. Are you comfortable having, our correspondence included? That's always a great practice just for personal relationships, right? As far as like the rights go, the answer is no. They don't need to be contacted for consent, right? They've given you a copy of something, it's yours to do with. Now, where it gets sticky is copyright. Who owns the copyright to this material? That is a concern for the archives, right? Part of that gift agreement, sometimes it's called a deed of gift, sometimes it's called a donor agreement, but that's a legally binding contract. Often archives will ask you to give them the intellectual property rights for the materials you're donating. Now, they typically do that because they make it public domain, right? So that basically says researchers are allowed to quote from your materials if they want to publish, use it in various formats, do anything they want to do with it without asking for your permission or paying you for the license to do that. However, if you are not the creator of that content, you can't give them those rights, right? So anything like correspondence that gets, included with your collection, and Joyce is perfectly correct, right? When this was being done with physical materials, it wasn't a big deal. Digitally, archives aren't technically legally allowed to put that material up online until that copyright expires. And as soon as I say the words until copyright expires, we're going to delve into a copyright law workshop that is very different from the point of this one. So we're going to save that for another time. But that is very much the concern of the archives. That's not for you to worry about as the donor. And if you're working to preserve the history, right, the records of an organization, that organization holds the copyright, so it's not a concern for you.
Mm-hmm. I think that, there's a lot of people who are just putting their foot in the water here, and they may be thinking of the future instead of what to do right now. But maybe we could help people kind of think ahead a little bit. If I've only been doing this for, let's say, 5 or 10 years, I do want to know if the Internet Archive is capturing my website, but what kinds of things should I be thinking of in terms of, let's just say, my administrative policies and procedures to make sure that I'm capturing the important things in the life of my organization? I'm thinking about PDFs versus docs and things like that. I wonder if we have any general sense and just kind of ways we could approach it.
So 2 very good questions sort of embedded in one. Part of that is about records management, right? And that can be a scary phrase, records management. Hiring a certified records manager is very expensive. And doing that work from a legal perspective, especially at a large organization, can be kind of daunting. I think for smaller organizations or for individuals, it's really more about what we would call your like crucial documents for operations, right? Like what do you need your bylaws, you need your constitution, right? Your founding documents. Some of those documents that you absolutely need to function, those are sort of the baseline. Anything else we'd love to have is added value. But as far as archiving and preserving that history, it's really about the operations of the organization. When we start asking the sort of second question about like, well, what file types are good? It's going to be impossible to tell until 100 years from now when we see what file types people are still using. But I doubt anybody on this call will be alive in 100 years. And if you are, I hope it's been a very long and very happy life. I will probably not be there to see it, right? But perhaps somebody. That being said, it's always best to, right, if you're still using .doc files. At this point, you should be using .docx, right? You should be using the more modern file types because those are the ones that are in current use and make it easier for archivists to maintain them moving forward. If you are in conversation with an archives about donating digital records, they will should probably have a list of file types that they accept, right? Because they are taking on the responsibility of making those file types accessible. Again, that's work they're doing. You don't have to know everything about how that works. If you're interested, I'm happy to tell you more. But the concern there is just sort of if they say, well, we don't take Word documents, we take PDFs, somebody then has to do the work of changing all your Word documents into PDF documents, right? And there are things that if you have an IT department, they can help you with that. The archives may be able to help you with that. It can sound daunting, but I promise there are ways to do it. And again, I feel like I keep saying this. You can reach out and I'm happy to sort of help you with that process. There are tools that can automate that and make it easier for you. Does that answer everything you asked, Doris?
I think it goes a long way. I think one point that I'd like to bring out is that in many cases, denominational archives are just managing to take care of the paper records in ways that are just evolving into digital files. And because of that, if you are thinking, let's say that your friend did die, they did leave you a lot of digital things to take care of, and you want to make sure that they're kept, you want to make sure that the archive you're considering is able to handle the file types that you're donating. And so the conversation really should be specifically about, with an archive, how would you preserve this? If I hand you a computer, will you just keep the computer, or do you have a way to make sure that these files don't deteriorate over time? So those are kind of additional questions to work with as you approach an archive. And it might help you to decide that you would rather work with a large academic archive than a smaller LGBTQ one downtown or, even in your state. And so it's just another consideration. But I wonder, Taylor, if you have any thoughts about that.
Well, I think that that's a really good point. The size of the archive will probably affect its budget. Those things tend to be tied together. And the budget will very much depend on or inform exactly how much digital preservation work they can do. I did see a question from Angelica that I think touches on this topic a little bit about if there are any good videos, tutorials, etc., about how to use digital archiving software. The answer is yes, right? And if this is something where if you are at an organization that wants to preserve your own digital records, there are walkthroughs and all sorts of things to sort of help you figure it out. That being said, a lot of it is going to depend on which software you want to use. That can be, right, like choosing a platform. I was just teaching a grad course on Monday about this a little bit, that there are a lot of platforms out there and it can feel very daunting. Again, reaching out to me, I'm happy to sort of help you sort through that. If you just like type in an internet search, digital archiving platforms, you'll get a lot of options. You can start to compare and contrast. Many of them are what we call open source software, right? So they're free to download and use. You can set it up and run it yourself. That does mean you need the know-how to do it, but they often have very passionate, very active support communities that will develop their own wiki pages or, tutorial videos, step-by-step instructions on how to do that work. And as you have questions, they will have very active listservs that you can email or other forms of communication so that you can say, help, I'm trying to figure this out. I have no idea what I'm doing. Can someone please help me out with it? So there are certainly things that folks can be doing, and making sure, again, that if you are donating to an archive, that they can work with the file types you're using and that they have the budget and the infrastructure to support digital preservation at the level you need? I think that's a good question. I also saw another question from Ben that I think Doris might be able to answer as well here. Ben asked if we work with creators regarding restrictions around personally or culturally sensitive materials, just to prevent full public access unless requested.
I think, I'm not quite sure. I think, Ben, you're interested in people who are creating web content, if I understand what you mean by creators. I'm not quite sure. Maybe, Ben, would you like to just turn on your mic and be a little more explicit about that?
Yeah.
I'd love to hear from you.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well.
I guess I'm mostly referring to like indigenous communities and people, because I'm familiar a little bit with Mukurtu, which is this management platform where tribal administrators can restrict access based on culturally sensitive materials. I mean, I'm assuming that's kind of built into any kind of archival system. There's always going to be a restricted box or a restricted folder. So I was just wondering if you have any examples of doing that for like people who have their own personal restrictions around materials that they're donating. And if you don't, that's fine. I was just curious.
I can just say from my work with archives that would, as a researcher and as sometimes we'll ask people if we can list their collections. And there are a few places that really don't want to put control of their, even the finding aids, kind of just broadly. They really want it to be centered in the context of the creators community. But I think that part of what you're asking is also something about online access. And so I'm going to ask Taylor to add to that.
Yeah, and we only have a few seconds before we're supposed to hand this over, so I'll go as quick as I can, and I apologize if I'm talking too fast. But I do think, right, Mukurtu, and I'm so glad you brought that up. I love Mukurtu. I work with a number of indigenous communities in and around Rhode Island, the New England area. And Mukurtu is doing amazing stuff because it allows, from the community's perspective, to restrict content in ways that don't necessarily make sense to a colonialist Western European perspective, right? And that's amazing. And there are some really great projects like that. So if you're working with a community that doesn't view information the way that sort of like the overarching narrative of information does, there are tools out there to help you do that. If you're just thinking more along, right, like your church has some records that are maybe sensitive, right? Or if your personal records have things that you want to make sure are preserved, but you maybe want to wait until everybody involved has passed on so that, you know, there's not that cultural shame attached to it anymore. And this, of course, happens a lot in the LGBTQ communities, right? We have lost a lot of information from creators who chose to destroy sensitive records rather than trust them. Yes, thank you for spelling that out in the chat, Mukurtu. It's an amazing CMS. I highly recommend it if you're working with Indigenous materials. And of course, you should be working with an Indigenous community who can help you with that if you're not a member yourself. But overall, right, yes, this is a thing archivists do. I will say archives do not want to preserve records that will never be accessible, right? The archivist will always say, I understand, I appreciate the sensitivity of the nature, this, right? Like, I get that. How do we shape this restriction so it can someday be opened, right? And that is all right. Archives and archivists are always working towards open access for information. We want information to be openly available as widely as possible. That isn't always possible in the moment. And so they're always very happy to work with you about like, how do we restrict this in a way that makes you as the donor comfortable and will someday lead to that open access? Because what's the point of preserving this history if no one's ever allowed to learn about it, right? So the long and short answer is yes, this is a common practice. Yes, we will work with you to help shape that. And part of that is hopefully you're working with an archive who is right, like sympathetic, if not an active part of your community, and recognizes some of this sensitive nature and is willing to sort of help you with that, or at the very least is open to that understanding and working with you.
Thank you very much. Thanks to everybody for your questions. And I just want to emphasize how Taylor ended this, is that an archive used to be kind of dusty and a scholarly venue, but now more and more archives need to work with the donors, with the creators, with the community as we preserve things into future generations. And we just really don't know what people will be interested in the future. We want to build the strength of our heritage to build our own communities. So I want to thank everybody who's helped, Isaiah for running this and for putting the toolkit online in the first place, and Mark for starting the organization, and everybody who came today and is interested. I think Taylor has shown he'll be a wonderful resource for all of us going forward, and I hope everybody feels comfortable. Yes, I agree, Ben. And in just using our services, the way that we can help everybody preserve our history. Thanks again. I'm glad to have seen so many familiar names. I'd love to shout out a lot of people, but just wonderful to be here today, to have served and leaving with such good feelings for everybody. Isaiah, can I turn it over to you?
Yes, you can. And thank you so much, Doris and Taylor, for a really informative workshop. And I want to say, Doris, you have been an invaluable member, not only to this team at the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network, but to the entire LGBTQ plus community. Our history is richer, more detailed, and more durable because of the hard work you have done over the years. So please accept this heartfelt thank you on behalf of LGBTQ plus people of faith around the world.
Yeah.
And thank you, Taylor, for stepping into some really big shoes to build upon the pioneering work that Doris has done. I want to say to those who have joined us that there will be an edited version of this workshop, and you will receive a link to that email in an email that we will send you shortly, so that you can share this with your colleagues and friends. If you're interested in more opportunities to explore the history of queer religious movements, just be sure to check out the LGBTQ-RAN website, and particularly our events page. There you will find announcements of future online programs, as well as recordings of past presentations. Finally, everything we do at the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network is possible only because of the financial contributions of people like you. And your solidarity with us is more important than ever in the face of efforts to ensure or to erase the record of our years of struggle and success as LGBTQ plus people of faith. So if you're not already a financial supporter of our work, please go to giveq.org on your laptop or phone and give today. That's giveq.org. And please check the box for monthly contributions, because whether it's $50, $20, or even $10 a month, a monthly tax-deductible gift to LGBTQ-RAN puts our absolutely critical work on a stable foundation. Your support is deeply appreciated. So on behalf of all of us at the LGBTQ Religious Archives Network, thank you for joining us. Have a historically good day.